Good morning, everyone. I'm going to do some breads for you today that involve a lot of butter. It's no secret that butter makes everything better, so just imagine breads that have been baked in a melted pool of butter, and you'll see where we're going for the day. I'm going to do two videos, actually, two different recipes using kind of the same technique. It's not a technique, it's just baking in butter, if you want to call it a technique. So my family's going to get their butter allotment for the week in one day. Not a bad thing, I suppose. Okay, the first recipe I'm going to give you is really as simple a biscuit as you can make. It's basically flour and leavener and milk. This was my grandmother's recipe. She wasn't really known for her culinary skills, but I always look forward to these at her house. She called them butter dips, although I'm 100% sure she used margarine instead of butter. Don't use margarine unless you really can't have butter. These she called butter dips. I call them butter biscuits. Either way, they're really delicious. Now, really, they might sound extravagantly buttery. It seems like a lot of butter. It's a stick of butter. This is about the same amount of butter you would put into any other biscuit. It's just baked in from the outside instead of cut into the flour. So it's not as crazy as it might sound. We're just going to start. This is one stick. I cut it up so it melts a little faster. I'm going to put it in my preheated oven. It's preheated to 400 degrees. So don't forget about this. It will burn. We're going to let the pan get nice and hot, so that'll give the biscuit sort of a crispy crust as well. Now the biscuit itself, again, it's so simple. This is 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. We're going to throw in just a tablespoon of baking powder, not soda, a couple tablespoons of sugar, and a hefty pinch of salt. Okay. So that is it for your dry ingredients. I suppose you could use self-rising flour in this. I don't really care for self-rising flour. It always feels too salty to me. It's so much, I mean, it's easy just to add baking powder. So buttermilk. Of course, you can use regular milk for this, but I really swear by buttermilk in baking. The texture is different. The flavor is better. It's not expensive. You can find it at any grocery store. So go for the buttermilk. It keeps a really long time in your fridge as well, even after the expiration date. So this is, I like whole buttermilk if you can find it, but any buttermilk will do. This is 1½ cups. We're just going to pour that right in. This is going to be a fairly wet biscuit dough. So once we've stirred it all together, we're going to put it on a well-floured surface. These are not round biscuits. I'm not going to use a biscuit cutter because the dough is fairly loose. We're just going to cut them into squares, well, rough squares. Okay, so we're going to flour our surface. This is what our dough is going to look like. Just flour and milk, really. I'm making these for breakfast this morning, but of course these go great with, I usually make them for dinner on Wednesdays. People always ask me, what is the flavor in those biscuits? Butter. These are really, really delicious with plenty of jam. Okay, so that's our dough right there. A little bit of flour. Just going to push these out. Fold it a little bit so it's cohesive. Okay. So again, these will rise nicely. So this is going to be about 1 inch thick. You see that? And we're going to make a dozen biscuits out of this. I will probably need to do a second batch here. You can double this recipe if you have a larger family like mine, because 12 doesn't go very far with 7 people. Okay, so this is just going to be cut in thirds or 3 by 4. All right, so this is our biscuit. You can see it's about 1 inch thick. Pretty simple. I'm going to pull the butter out here. Clear some space. Should be good and melted by now. We're going to dip these in the butter. Hence the name butter dips. We're going to plop them in on one side and flip them, of course, very carefully. Flour off my hands. All right, so it's not quite all the way melted, but it's fine for now. So this is our butter. Let's set it here. So do this carefully. It's hot. I'm just gonna lay it here and then flip it over. Make sure it gets coated in the butter. And these are gonna be, the edges are gonna get crispy and brown and so yummy buttery. We fight over the edges around here. So just 3 by 4. And if they kind of bake together a little bit, that's okay. They come apart really easily because they're buttered in between. The other recipe I'm going to show you today is a yeasted bread, but it's one of my easier yeasted breads too. It's a very wet dough. It's no knead. I call that butter bread. That's another old family recipe. So these are going to bake up very quickly because this pan is scalding hot. The oven is at 400, so they're going to do a real quick rise. See them right here, okay? This is how they look. So in about 10 to 12 minutes, they're going to be ready to eat. Okay, it's been more like 15 minutes. These are nice and golden brown. You can hear the butter sizzling. They smell delicious. Okay, this bottom part, it's all soaked in butter. So this is a butter dip or butter biscuit. We're going to serve these with my giant squirt bottle of jam. And that's our breakfast for today. Or serve them with soup or some other delicious dinner. And later on, I'm going to show you my butter bread. So that'll be coming up in a minute. Hello again. Okay, we're going to move on to our second butter bread. This one is a yeasted dough, not a biscuit. It's also an old family recipe. This one was my aunt's, and my mom would make it on special occasions because it contains 2 whole sticks of butter. So this one has butter in the dough as well as baked in butter. So it is a little bit extravagant, but my husband, the first time I made it, said it tasted the closest to a good French brioche that he'd ever had in the States. So it's got that going for it. It's an easy dough to make. It's no knead. It's just stir in a bowl and let it sit. It's going to be a really, really wet dough. We're just going to plop it in our pan when we're ready. You can't even handle it really. It's so sticky. So what we have here, I've got my church cookbook here. I'm trying to pare down my recipes back to the original small recipes. So instead of a box of butter and 8 eggs and 12 cups of flour, we're going to start with 3 cups of flour. This is just all purpose. And into that, we're going to put our dry ingredients. Just a 1/4 cup of sugar. Oh, I don't have a tablespoon. tablespoon of yeast and a good pinch of salt. Okay. And I just have a stick of butter that I've melted. Okay, it's about room temperature now. I'm going to pour that right in on top of everything. If it's really hot, boiling melted butter, don't pour it on your yeast. Let it cool down a bit. This is just, a cup of milk. And 2 eggs. There's eggs in it. Okay, that's it. Easy peasy. I'm just going to stir it all together until it comes together. And again, it's going to be very wet. This is another one of those nice bread doughs that you can make right now and put it in the fridge for, 1, 2, 3 days. It gives it a little bit of flavor. You can make this as breakfast. You can make it for a nice side to your dinner. Whatever you want to do with it. So, this is just going to sit on my counter because we are into our warm months here. I think we're finally there. It's about 80 degrees outside, so my kitchen is nice and warm. I haven't turned my air conditioning on yet. I always hold out as long as I can. Okay, so that's it. You'll see just how wet this is. Okay. Yeah, you're not going to be able to get your hands in there and knead it. There's no need. Okay, so I'm just going to cover this. Got my handy lidded bowl here. You can use saran wrap or even a damp towel. If your kitchen is not warm, you might want to warm up your oven just a tiny bit, turn it off, and then put your dough in there to proof. This isn't going to take too long, 45 minutes maybe. So I will be back then. Okay, it's been about an hour. This has been sitting here, and you can see it's not big and fluffy like some bread doughs because it's fairly wet and heavy, but it's ready to go. And I made a mistake in my earlier video. This actually had a 1/4 cup of just tap water added to the recipe, and I forgot to put that in, so I added it after and just stirred it into the dough, and it's fine. So I will include that in the recipe on the video link. Okay, so this you will see is nice and gooey and wet. It should be full of air bubbles from the yeast. This is another stick of butter that I've melted and poured into a 9 by 13 pan, just like we did for the biscuits. So we're just going to take our spoon or rubber spatula and sort of scoop this and plop it into the pan. Usually try to do about 8 little scoops, 2 by 4. And this isn't going to seem like enough dough, but it's going to rise up as it bakes, and it'll all sort of spread out and come together, so the whole pan will be full by the time it's done. This is going to need to sit for just another 15 minutes or so on your counter, so then you can preheat your oven to 350 degrees, and baking time will be about 20 to 25 minutes, just until it's nice and golden brown. This smells so good, just the yeast itself. Okay, so this is one last scoop. It doesn't have to be perfectly even. Again, it's going to kind of all spread out and even out as it sits. So there's that. That's what it should look like. You can take a look at it here. I know, it's weird, but it comes together. So we're going to leave that for 15 minutes. Okay, I let it rest for about 20 minutes, and it got nice and puffy. And then I put it in my oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes. And this is our end result. It kind of looks like a cornbread almost, but it's definitely a nice, slightly sweet yeast bread with some really great butter flavor. So that is 2 recipes for cooking in butter. I do have a few more recipes like this if anybody's interested, including Dutch pancakes and a cobbler that is just fantastic. So let me know, and I hope you enjoy these recipes. See you later.